Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive mystery. Why do so many everyday arguments completely crash and burn, even when both people are being totally honest? If you've ever been stuck in one of those looping arguments where it feels like you are literally speaking two different languages, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Throughout this season, we're going to completely shatter your old assumptions about conflict, emotion, meaning, and misunderstanding. By the end, I promise you're going to say, I have never looked at conflict this way before. And it all starts right here with one mind-blowing realization. You are not always having the same conversation.
So let's start with part one, the everyday conversation trap. We're going to kick things off with a super relatable everyday trap that honestly makes absolutely zero sense on paper. Because let's be real, we humans are just predictably terrible at arguing. Think about the last time you were stuck in a fight that went exactly like this. One person says, "You never listen," and the other person immediately snaps back, all defensive, "I heard every word. You said X, Y, and Z. Sound familiar?" It's an incredibly frustrating loop to be stuck in. Now, here's where it gets super interesting. That second person, they might actually be factually correct. They might have perfect auditory memory. They literally received the sound waves and can repeat the exact sentence back word for word. But here's the catch. They are completely missing the underlying layer of what's actually being communicated. The words themselves, they sound simple, right? But the actual meaning is happening on a totally different level. When the first person says, "You never listen," they absolutely do not mean you failed to receive literal sound waves. What they're really saying is, "I do not feel understood," or "I don't feel considered." They are talking about their lived experience, while the second person is just stubbornly holding on to physical facts. Which brings us to part two, the hidden layer mismatch. This completely explains why trying harder to explain yourself so often makes things way worse. Think about it. Two people can be standing inside the exact same conversation, but one is defending the facts, what literally happened, while the other is describing the lived impact, how that event actually landed in their body. And the conversation just tightens up. Because the more one person defends the facts, the more the other person feels like their emotional reality is just being completely erased. And the disconnect just keeps snowballing. One person is busy explaining what they meant, their intention, while the other person is asking whether the impact matters at all. They're trying to name harm. So you've got the first person frantically trying to clear their name, and the second person is just desperately trying to get their pain acknowledged. Ultimately, it boils down to this. One person is trying to prove absolute accuracy, while the other is just trying to feel recognized. And when this happens, the argument becomes practically impossible to solve. Why? Because both people keep vigorously answering the wrong question, totally unaware of what the other person is actually asking. So here is the absolute crucial takeaway, this concept of layer mismatch. This right here is the foundational architecture of misunderstanding. The problem isn't that one person is stupid or irrational or dishonest or just refusing to listen. Not at all. The problem is that they are unknowingly operating on completely different layers of meaning, all while assuming they are in the exact same conversation. It's wild when you think about it. Moving on to part three, intention versus impact. Let's look at how this mismatch plays out in what is probably the most common and honestly most painful trap of all. I mean, I am sure we have all been on one side or the other of this exact exchange. "That hurt me," which is met immediately with, "Well, I didn't mean it that way." It's just an automatic reflex. But let's pause and look at what is actually happening beneath the surface of those words. The hurt belongs to what the source framework calls the experiential layer. The intention, on the other hand, belongs to the intentional layer. And guess what? Both statements might be 100% true, but an intention simply does not answer an impact. The impact needs acknowledgement, and the intention needs clarification. When we use our good intentions to just overwrite someone else's real pain, we aren't solving the conflict. We are literally just changing the subject. So how do you practically recognize these clashes so you can actually start to repair them? Well, listen for these common pairings. You've got intention versus impact, like we just talked about, but you also have a single event versus a repeating pattern. Someone says, "Hey, it was just one time," while the other says, "No, this keeps happening." Or you have literal versus symbolic. "It was just a joke," versus "It really didn't feel like a joke." True repair doesn't begin with forced apologies. It begins when someone has the realization that they're answering the wrong layer entirely. Honestly, if you take only one single thing away from this explainer today, please let it be this. The problem is not always what people are arguing about. It is the layer they are arguing from. Seriously, keep that burned into your brain the next time you feel a conversation spinning out of control.
All right, part 4, the boundary of location.
Now, before we jump into the solution, we've got to establish some rigorous boundaries here, because this is definitely not about handing out free passes. Acknowledging a layer mismatch absolutely does not mean every accusation is correct. It doesn't mean every feeling proves objective harm. Feelings are incredibly real, but they aren't unquestionable facts. It just means that before you judge or defend or set a boundary, you need to locate exactly what kind of claim is being made. Because if someone is speaking from impact and we answer only with facts, they're going to feel dismissed every single time.
And finally, part 5, locate before you defend. So how do we actually apply this map to fix our own conversations? Well, true repair often begins with the humility of one very simple realization. Just saying out loud, "Oh man, I answered the wrong layer. Let me go back." You have no idea how fast this de-escalates the tension, because it signals to the other person that you aren't fighting their reality, you just miscategorized it. You're stepping out of that toxic defensive loop and stepping back into the same room as them. This right here is your practical repair sentence. Keep this in your back pocket, always. It's an incredible tool to just pause the escalation and figure out exactly what kind of claim is being made before you start getting defensive. Notice how beautifully it categorizes the chaos. What happened is the physical layer, how it felt is the experiential layer, what I meant is the intentional layer, and what this means for us is the relational layer. You are quite literally locating the conversation.
I want you to think about that one argument you keep having over and over again in your own life. Maybe it's with a partner, a coworker, a friend. Bring it to mind and ask yourself this question. Are you stuck because you're answering an emotional impact with a physical fact? Are you treating a deep structural pattern like it's just a random isolated event?
Because at the end of the day, sometimes the very first step toward true understanding isn't agreement. It is location. You don't have to surrender your perspective, but you absolutely have to figure out where you are standing. So as you move forward today, I want you to look at your most frustrating, seemingly unsolvable conflict and ask yourself the hard question. Are you even in the same conversation?
Want to learn more? Explore the full framework in reality, perception, and meaning. Available now at derukailo.com and on Amazon Kindle.